The first blast came an inch from my left ear, and it was meant to make me jump out of my own skin. I had heard rifle fire at close quarters, the crack of a falling masonry block, the howl of a storm coming over open water in the dark. None of those things had ever made me move on a post, and a plastic horn from a sporting goods shelf was not going to be the thing that did it. But the man holding it did not know that yet, and watching him learn it, slowly, over the longest afternoon of his small career, is the reason I am telling you this at all. My name is Wren Halloway, and at the time of this story I had stood the Caldrith Gate of the Valoran Palace for 9 years. The Caldrith is the eastern gate, the one the tour buses crawl past, the one with the long stone box of a sentry plinth set back from the railing so that a sentry stands a clean stride above the cobbles, in full view, in the red wool and the tall black bearskin, the white gloves, the medals, the rifle held just so. We do not speak on that post. We do not turn our heads. We do not look down at the people who climb up beside us to grin into a camera. The whole point of the post, the thing the bearskin and the wool and the white gloves are all saying without a word, is that the man inside the uniform is not the point. The duty is the point. The crown the duty serves is the point. I am a stone the duty leans against. That is the job, and I had chosen it with open eyes, and I would tell you now that I loved it, though we are not built to say so. I had marked the man before he ever raised the horn. You learn to read a forecourt the way a shepherd reads a sky. Most of the people who come to the Caldrith are kind, or curious, or simply tired, footsore tourists who want one photograph and a memory. You learn their shapes at 50 yards. This one had a different shape. He came up the cobbles with his chin out and his phone already up, sweeping it across the railing, across the crowd, across me, narrating to it in a bright, hard voice that did not belong to anyone he was actually speaking to. He wore new white shoes and a jacket with the tags of cleverness all over it, and he carried a shopping bag from which, as he came, he drew the horn, a fat red canister with a cone on the top, the kind they sell to people who watch sport, the kind that is loud enough to clear a stadium. "All right," he said to his phone, loud enough for 30 people to hear. "Let's see if the famous statue is real." Then he climbed the 2 worn steps to my plinth, set himself a hand's breadth from my left shoulder, lifted the horn until the cone was nearly touching my ear, and pressed it. If you have never heard one of those things go off against the side of your own head, I cannot fully describe it to you, and I would not wish to. It is not a sound so much as a wall. It goes in through the ear and lands somewhere behind the eyes and tries to shove the whole of you sideways off your feet. My eardrum rang like a struck bell. The crowd below flinched as one body. I saw it at the edge of my vision, 40 people recoiling, hands flying up, and a woman near the front gave a short cry. A pigeon went up off the railing in a clatter. And I did not move. I want to be precise about what that means because it is the whole of the thing. It does not mean I felt nothing. It means I had spent 9 years building, hour by silent hour, a place to put what I felt, a kind of room inside myself with a heavy door, and when the wall of sound hit me, I put it in that room and I shut the door, and on the outside of the door there was a man in red wool looking at a fixed point on the far stone, breathing slow, holding a rifle, perfectly still. The ringing was in the room. The flinch was in the room. The anger, and there was anger. I will not pretend to you that there was not. The anger was in the room too, and the door was shut on all of it, and the man you could see had not so much as blinked. He lowered the horn and looked at me, and I watched the expectation drain out of his face. He had wanted the jump. The little involuntary lurch, the wide eyes, the broken composure, that was the prize, that was the clip, that was the thing he had climbed 2 steps and spent his afternoon for. He had not got it. For a half-second something honest crossed his features, something almost like a child who has thrown a stone at a window and watched it bounce off glass that turned out to be steel. Then he covered it because his phone was watching and he laughed. "Nothing," he announced to the lens, delighted, turning so the crowd was behind him. "Nothing, did you see that? stone cold. All right, round two. I should tell you what a post like the Cauldron actually is, in law and in fact, because it matters for everything that came after, and because the man with the horn understood none of it, which was the root of his whole mistake. I was not a performer. I was not a costumed greeter hired to delight a crowd and absorb whatever the crowd handed me. I was a serving sentry on a guarded threshold, posted understanding orders, and those orders are simple and they are old. I hold my post. I do not abandon it for provocation. I do not brawl with a man on the cobbles, because the moment a sentry steps down to settle a private grievance, the post is empty, and an empty gate is the only thing a gate exists to prevent. So the discipline that looked to the laughing man like helplessness, like a statue too dim or too cowed to react, was in fact the most active thing on that forecourt. It was a decision, renewed every second, not to give him the one thing his whole scheme depended on me giving him. But standing orders are not the only thing that lives at the Cauldron. 6 feet behind my plinth in the shadow of the arch, there is a sentry box, and inside it that day stood Corporal Ackley, my relief, with a field telephone and a clear sightline to the whole forecourt. And 40 feet behind him, behind the iron, the gate sergeant of the watch sat with the duty log and a window. And above all of it, mounted high in the stone where no tourist ever thinks to look, were the cameras of the household, 3 of them covering the Cauldron alone, feeding a room I had never seen, watched by people whose entire profession was noticing exactly the kind of thing that was beginning to happen on my plinth. I was still. The post was not blind. The man with the horn had walked into a far more patient machine than he could imagine, and he had just started its clock. He drew a breath, lifted the horn again, and this time he counted it down for the camera. 3, he said, grinning. 2, 1. And the wall of sound came again, longer this time, and I stood inside my shut door and waited for him to understand that the afternoon belonged to me. He gave it to me in pieces over the next hour, and I will give it to you the same way, because the slowness was the whole shape of it. A wiser man would have tried once, got nothing, and walked away to find an easier mark. This one did not have it in him to walk away. He had told the lens there would be a payoff, and now the lens was waiting, and he could not bear to be the man who promised the statue would break and delivered a statue that didn't. So he doubled. That is the engine of every man like him I have ever stood across from. The first dare is for the crowd. The second is to save face after the first one fails. And from there, it is no longer about me at all. It is a man fighting his own pride in public, with my ear as the battlefield. He blasted the horn a 3rd time and a 4th. He learned to vary it, a long flat note, then 3 short stabs, then a single shriek right as I drew a slow breath, timing it to catch me mid-inhale. Each time the crowd flinched and each time I did not, and each time the gap between his expectation and the steel of the post grew a little wider, and into that gap slowly, the mood of the forecourt began to change. I should tell you what the cost of that was, on my side of the door, because the stillness has a price, and a man who only sees the outside of it never guesses how high. By the 4th blast my left ear was no longer ringing in single notes, but in a continuous high whine, a thin wire of sound that would still be there when I came off post that evening, and would not fully leave for 2 days. The muscles down the left side of my neck and into my shoulder had drawn themselves into a single hard cord, because the body, when it is forbidden to flinch, does not stop wanting to, it simply spins the flinch inward, clenching against itself. And after an hour of that, a man aches in places he did not know could ache. Sweat ran under the wool and the chin strap of the bearskin pressed a line of fire across my jaw. None of it reached my face. That is the trade. The calm you see on a sentry is not the calm of a man who feels nothing. It is the calm of a man who has agreed to carry, on the inside and entirely alone, everything a normal man would let out, and to carry it without a single sign. The horn was loud. Holding it in was louder. And still I held, and still he blew, and slowly the laughter of the forecourt curdled into something else. I felt it before I could have named it. At first the crowd had been with him, or at least amused by him, a daring fellow, a bit of theater, harmless. People had laughed at the first blast the way you laugh when someone is startled at a fairground. But a crowd is a single animal, and it has a sense of fairness older than any law, and somewhere around the fourth or fifth blast that animal began to turn. You cannot watch a man do the same cruel thing over and over to someone who will not, on principle, defend himself and keep finding it funny. The laughter thinned. A man near the front stopped filming and put his phone in his pocket. A gray-haired woman said something low and sharp to her husband. And a small voice, I could not see the child, only hear it, said, "Why is he being so mean to him?" and was hushed, and the hush had shame in it. The man with the horn heard none of this because he was not listening to anyone real. He was listening to the bright voice in his own head that was already cutting this into a triumph. "Look at him," he was saying to the lens, walking a slow circle around my plinth now, close, too close, the way a man circles something he is no longer sure of. Not a flicker. They train them like dogs, you know. You could set off a bomb and he'd just stand there. Watch this one. And he climbed up onto the plinth itself, up beside me, so that we shared the stone, his white shoe an inch from my polished boot, and he put the cone of the horn directly against the side of my bearskin and held the button down. That one I felt in my teeth. It went on for 3 full seconds, 4, and the inside of my skull was a single white ringing note, and the heavy door of the room I keep took the whole of it and held. I fixed my eyes on the carved acanthus leaf high on the far pillar that I had used as my anchor for 9 years, and I counted my own pulse, slow, the way a diver counts, and I did not move my eyes from the leaf, and I did not move my boot from its mark, and I did not move. When he let go, the silence rang almost as loud as the horn had, and in that silence I heard the thing that told me the afternoon had truly turned. Nobody laughed. Not one person. A forecourt of 40, 50 people, phones up, and not a single laugh. Only a low, ugly murmur, the sound a crowd makes when it has decided that what it is watching is not entertainment but a wrong. He heard it then. He was not stupid, only vain, and the two are different. He felt the crowd cool against the back of his neck, and instead of doing the one thing that might still have saved him, climbing down, laughing it off, walking away while it was merely foolish, he did what vanity always does when it feels itself losing. He got angry, and he turned that anger on me because I was the one who had made him look like this, by the simple act of refusing to play. "What is it with you?" he said, and the brightness had gone out of his voice now and something lower had come into it. "Huh, what's your problem? You think you're better than me. You think standing there like a doll makes you better than me." He was close to my face now, his own face flushed, the horn loose in his hand, the phone in the other trembling slightly because his hand had begun to shake. "Say something, say one word. I dare you to say one word." And here is a thing I have learned in 9 years that the man would never learn in his whole life. Silence is not the absence of an answer. Silence, held against a man who is shouting for a reaction, is the loudest answer there is. Every second I did not give him the word he dared me to give was a second in which the whole forecourt watched him beg a statue to come down to his level, and the statue decline. I had said nothing. I had said everything. He could feel it landing on him, and he could not find the place it was coming from. I will tell you what was happening inside the shut door, because you have earned it by reading this far, and because the stillness is a lie if I let you think there was nothing behind it. Behind the door I was running the standing orders like a litany, the way you hold a railing on a stair in the dark. Hold the post. Do not abandon the post for provocation. The relief is 6 feet behind you. The cameras are above you. The sergeant has the log. You are not alone and you are not helpless. You are the still center of a thing already in motion. I thought of my old color sergeant, dead 4 years now, who had trained me on this very plinth and told me, the first week, the thing I have never forgotten. "Lad, any fool can swing a fist. The whole world can swing a fist. You are going to learn the rarer thing, which is to hold one." I thought of him and I held mine and the door stayed shut. It was at that moment that one of the bystanders tried to help me, and I have to tell you about it, because it was the hardest thing I bore all afternoon, harder than the horns, harder than the man's spit-flecked dares, and because it taught me something about the post I had not fully understood even in 9 years. He was an older man, broad in the shoulders with the bearing of someone who had served, and he came up out of the crowd with his jaw set and put a hand on the loud man's arm. "That's enough, son," he said. "Leave him be. He can't answer you and you know it. That's the whole rotten point of what you're doing, isn't it, picking the one man who isn't allowed to hit back?" He was right, and he was kind, and every part of me that was a man and not a sentry wanted to thank him. But I could not move, and I could not speak, and worse than that, and this is the thing I learned, I could not let his help become my rescue. The instant a sentry permits a member of the public to fight his battles for him on his own threshold, the post has failed. The stillness has been broken, just by someone else's hand instead of mine. If that good old soldier and the loud man had come to blows over me, it would have been my discipline that caused it, and the day would have ended with a decent man hurt and the gate disgraced. So I did the only thing the post allowed, which was nothing, and I willed him with everything in my fixed unmoving face to step back before it cost him. The loud man shook the hand off his arm and rounded on him instead, glad of a target that would actually react. "Mind your business, Granddad. Nobody's talking to you." And for a 6 second I thought it would go wrong right there. But the old soldier looked at the loud man for a long moment. The way you look at something you have decided is beneath the dignity of your own hands. And then he looked up at me, and I think he understood, because men who have stood a post recognize another man standing one, and he gave a single short nod and stepped back into the crowd. He had offered. I had not been able to take it. We both knew why. It is one of the lonelier truths of the uniform, that the same discipline which makes you worth defending is the discipline that forbids you to be defended, and you stand inside that contradiction alone, and you hold. The man saw he was getting nothing. He stepped back down off the plinth, breathing hard, and for a moment I thought it might be over. That pride had finally run out of fuel and he would slink off to edit his failure into a victory in the privacy of his own screen. But then his eye fell on the shopping bag at the foot of the steps, and I saw a new idea move across his face, and my stomach, behind its door, went cold. Because in the bag, I now understood, there had been more than one horn. He had come prepared to escalate. What he pulled from the bag was bigger than the first, a marine air horn, the kind kept on boats to be heard a mile off across open water, a thing built to save lives in fog, twisted now into a toy for breaking a man on a plinth. He held it up to the lens like a trophy. "Okay," he said, and the laugh he gave was thin and had no joy in it anymore, only the hard need of a man who has gone too far to stop. "Okay. If the little one won't do it, let's try the big one. This is the one they use on container ships. Let's see the doll handle this." I want you to understand exactly what changed in that moment, because this is where his afternoon stopped being foolishness and became something the law has a name for. A single prank horn once against a sentry is a stupid disrespect. The household sees 100 such things a year and answers most of them with patience, because patience is what the post is for. But a man who tries a thing, fails, and then deliberately reaches for a more dangerous instrument to do greater harm, that is no longer a prank. That is a course of conduct. That is escalation, witnessed and recorded, and escalation is the thing the patient machine behind me had been waiting to confirm. I did not know all of that in those words at the time, but I knew the air had changed. I knew that 6 feet behind me, in the shadow of the arch, Corporal Ackley had picked up the field telephone. The man climbed the steps a third time. He set himself square in front of me, raised the marine horn until the great brass bell of it was a hand's width from my face, and I looked past it at my acanthus leaf, and I made the room inside me as deep as I could make it, and I waited. I did not have to wait through it. Because at that moment, a voice came across the forecourt that was not bright and was not cruel and had carried over parade grounds for 30 years, and it said one word: hold. It was the gate sergeant, Sergeant Voss, a wide gray block of a man who had stood every post in the household before he ever sat behind the log, and who could put more authority into one syllable than the man with the horn had managed in an hour of shouting. He had come out from behind the iron, unhurried, and he was crossing the cobbles at the steady, unstoppable pace of a man who has decided exactly what is going to happen next. Behind him, 2 more of the watch had stepped out into the arch, and behind them I could not see this part, but I learned it later. A call had already gone to the gatehouse, and from the gatehouse to the police post that the household keeps at the eastern wall, and men were already moving. The man with the horn turned, the great brass bell still raised, and for the first time all afternoon something other than vanity was on his face. "I'm allowed to be here," he said, too fast. "This is public. I can film. I know my rights." "You're standing on Crown ground on a guarded plinth, sir, beside a serving sentry," Voss said, and he did not raise his voice, and that was somehow worse for the man than if he had. "Step down, now." "Or what?" said the man, and he made the mistake of laughing again, and he made a far larger mistake at the same time. Rattled, cornered, wanting the crowd back on his side and not knowing how to get it, he turned back to me, the silent one, the safe target, the doll who would not defend himself, and he put his free hand flat against my chest and shoved, hard, to knock me off my mark, to make me stumble, to get on camera at last the thing he had failed all afternoon to earn. I want to be very plain about what happened next, because the whole of my training, the whole of 9 years, lived in the next 2 seconds, and a man who did not know the post would have read it exactly backward. I did not stumble. A sentry is set on his mark like a fence post is set in the ground. A shove from a soft man in new white shoes does not move a body that has stood 8-hour watches through gales. I rocked perhaps an inch and came back, and the rifle stayed exactly where it was, because to bring a weapon to bear on an unarmed fool is the one unforgivable failure of judgment on a ceremonial post, and I would have left the service before I made it. What I did instead was the precise, drilled, proportionate thing the post permits a sentry to do when he is laid hands upon and cannot be expected to simply absorb it. I took 1 step. A single hard step forward off my mark, boot down on the stone like a gunshot, the whole armed and disciplined weight of me suddenly and entirely facing him at the distance of a foot, and I brought the rifle up across my body to the port, not pointed at him, never at him, but barring him, a wall of wood and steel and red wool come abruptly to life directly in his path. And for the first time, the man with the horns flinched. He flinched so hard he nearly went off the back of the plinth. The marine horn fell from his hand and clattered down the steps. The phone jerked. Every drop of the bright contempt drained out of him in that single instant, and what was left underneath it was a small frightened man who had spent an hour poking something he had been absolutely certain was harmless, and had just watched it move. The crowd made a single sound, not a laugh, not a cheer, a sharp collective intake, the sound of 50 people watching a thing finally, rightly tip. I held there exactly 1 heartbeat, the port arms, the foot of distance, my eyes on his at last, and saying without a word everything the standing orders forbade my mouth to say. Then, and this was the part that I am, looking back, most quietly proud of, I stepped back. 1 step back onto my mark, rifle returned to the shoulder, eyes forward to the acanthus leaf, the statue restored. I had moved exactly as far as I was permitted and not 1 inch farther, and then I had put myself back where the duty required me to be. The whole thing had taken perhaps 3 seconds. It had said everything. Because in those 3 seconds the man had learned the lesson the entire afternoon had been built to teach him, though he would not have put it in these words. The stillness had never been weakness. The stillness had been a choice, mine, held second by a man entirely capable of ending him and entirely disciplined enough not to. I had been letting him do it. And the moment he crossed from disrespect into assault, the choice changed, and he saw, in one step and one bark of a boot on stone, exactly how thin the line had been that he had spent an hour cheerfully dancing on. Sergeant Voss reached the foot of the steps. "Down," he said. "You've laid hands on a serving sentry, it's done." The man came down. There was nowhere else to go. I held my post through all of it, which is to say I saw it the way a lighthouse sees a wreck, fixed, unmoving, taking in everything at the edge of a gaze that never turns. 2 officers of the household police came across the forecourt at a walk, because men who know their business do not run when the thing is already won. They were calm and they were unhurried and they were entirely certain, and certainty in a uniform is a kind of gravity. The man felt it pull at him and he began, far too late, to scramble. "This is a misunderstanding," he said. "It was a joke, it was content. He's not even hurt, look, he's fine, he's standing right there. You can't arrest a man over a joke." The brightness was trying to come back into his voice and could not get purchase. "Do you know how many people follow me? Do you know who's going to see this? You're making a mistake. You're all making a huge mistake." "You blew a horn into a serving sentry's ear, sir," the senior officer said in the flat, almost bored tone of a man who has heard every version of every excuse. Repeatedly, after he showed no reaction, then you fetched a louder one specifically to do greater harm, and then you put your hands on him and pushed. "We have all of it. We have it from 3 angles. Turn around." 3 angles, the man repeated, and you could see the word reach him. He had been thinking the whole afternoon about his own camera, his own footage, the triumph he was assembling for his own audience. It had not once crossed his mind that the gate he was performing in front of was itself watching him, patiently, from 3 points in the stone, building a far more complete and far less flattering record than the one in his trembling hand. His own phone, which he had meant to make him famous, was about to become the clearest evidence against him, because everything he had said to it, "Let's see the doll handle this," every gleeful narration of his own escalating intent, was now a recorded confession that he had known exactly what he was doing and had chosen to do worse. They turned him around. They did it gently, professionally, with none of the violence he had spent the afternoon trying to provoke, and that gentleness was its own kind of verdict, the calm of people for whom this was simply the orderly closing of a thing that had only ever had one ending. The crowd did not jeer. I had half expected them to, and was glad afterward that they did not. There is no honor in a mob, and the forecourt that day did not become one. They simply watched, quiet and grave, the way decent people watch a wrong being set right, and a few of them I saw this clearly, and it stayed with me. A few of them looked up at me on my plinth and gave a small nod, the nod you give to a man who has held a line so that you did not have to. He was still talking as they walked him toward the eastern wall. He talked about lawyers and about followers, and about how everyone was going to hear about this, and the further they walked the smaller and thinner the words got, until they were just the noise a man makes when the size of the thing he has done is finally arriving in him, and he is trying to outrun it with his mouth. Then they were through the arch and gone, and the forecourt was quiet, and Sergeant Voss came and stood for a moment at the foot of my plinth, not looking at me, looking out at the crowd the way I was. "Well held, Holloway," he said, very low, not moving his lips much, the way we speak on a live post. "Well held." I did not answer. I could not on the post. But I learned later what Voss had been doing in the long minutes before he ever crossed the cobbles, and it changed the way I understood the whole afternoon. He had not been sitting behind the log, hoping the fool would tire himself out. From the moment the first horn went off, he had been on the line to the watchroom, and the watchroom had been doing the unhurried, methodical thing it exists to do, marking the time of each blast in the log, confirming that all 3 cameras held a clean angle, raising the police post at the eastern wall. And this is the part that decided everything, declining to move 1 second before the man had given them enough. A sentry who is shoved off his mark at the first provocation looks like a man who lost his temper. A sentry who holds and holds and holds, while the offender is allowed to demonstrate his full, escalating, deliberate intent on 3 recorded angles, is a man whose discipline has built an airtight case around the very person trying to break him. My stillness had not merely been my own private endurance. It had been, without my planning it, the patient bait of a trap the man had walked further into with every blast. The longer I held, the deeper he buried himself, and the watch behind me had known it and had let him. I have thought often since about how strange and how fitting that is, that the most passive-looking thing on that forecourt, a man standing dead still and saying nothing, was in fact the load-bearing wall of the entire justice that followed. The horns, the shoves, the dares, all of it landed on me, and all of it, because I held, became evidence instead of victory. But I will tell you that those 3 words from that man were worth more to me than any amount of the fame the fellow with the horns had been chasing, and I have kept them. I learned the rest in pieces over the following days, the way a sentry always learns the ends of the stories that begin at his gate, from the watch room, from the sergeant's mess, from the dry, careful language of the duty reports. The man's name does not matter, and I will not give it even if I could. He was a maker of what he called shock videos, a man who had built a small following by going to places where people were obliged to stay calm, and trying to make them lose it for a camera, security guards, museum attendants, ceremonial sentries up and down the country. He had a pattern. The household's people found it within an hour, because finding patterns is what they do. Half a dozen earlier videos of the same stunt at the same kind of post, each one a little bolder than the last, each one a little step further across the line, and not one of his targets before me had been positioned the way the cauldron is positioned, under 3 cameras and a sergeant of 30 years standing, and a police post 60 feet behind the wall. He had been getting away with it for a year because he had been choosing soft ground. He had finally, out of nothing but the appetite of his own growing vanity, walked onto hard. The charges, when they came, were not dramatic, and I was glad of that too. Drama would have made him a martyr to the small, angry corner of the world that mistakes cruelty for courage. They were quiet, and they were exact. A breach of the peace for the sustained disturbance, the repeated horns against a crowd of bystanders, the woman who cried out, the children who flinched. An assault for the shove. The law does not care that I did not fall, only that he laid hands on me with intent, and the footage made the intent plain. And because of the pattern they had found and the deliberate fetching of the larger horn after the first had failed, the prosecutor was able to show what mattered most, that this was not a moment's thoughtlessness, but a chosen, escalating course of conduct against a man the offender believed could not, by the rules of his duty, defend himself. That last part is the part that ends men like him. A judge can forgive a flash of stupidity. A judge does not forgive a man who studies exactly how defenseless his victim is, and then uses it. There was a fine, and there was a period of community service, and there was an order keeping him away from the palace and from posts like it, which I expect he resented more than the rest, because it took from him the only stage he knew how to perform on. But the consequence that truly closed the account was not the one the court handed down. It was the one he had built himself, with his own hands, all afternoon, and it arrived the way these things now arrive, fast, and from every direction at once. He had wanted the footage to make him. The footage made him, all right, but not his footage, the crowds. 40, 50 people had stood on that forecourt with their own phones, and a great many of them had filmed not the brave, daring fellow he imagined himself to be, but a small flushed man blowing a boat horn into the ear of a sentry who would not so much as blink, over and over, while a woman cried out and a child asked why he was being so mean. That was the video that traveled. That was the one the world watched, millions of times over, not the breaking of the statue he had promised his audience, but the long, patient, unbreakable stillness of a man doing his duty, and the ugliness of the one trying to wreck it. He had set out to humiliate a guard, and had succeeded only in showing the whole world precisely what discipline looks like, and precisely what its opposite looks like standing beside it. The audience he had spent a year building turned on him in a single night. The very thing he had chased, the eyes of the world, was the thing that undid him, because the world, given a clear enough look, can still tell the difference between a man who holds and a man who only shoves. I never spoke to him. I want to be honest with you about that because the tidy version of this story would have him come back, chastened a year later to apologize and me to grant him some grave forgiveness from the plinth. It did not happen, and I am not sure I would have wanted it to. He was not my problem to forgive. He was the law's problem and the crowd's, and in the end his own, and the post is not about me and was never about him. It was about the threshold I stood on, and the duty that threshold serves, and the simple fact that a guarded gate does not stop being a guarded gate because a foolish man decides to make a show of it. I went back on the cauldron the next morning and the morning after that and for years after that, and I stood it exactly as I had always stood it. Red wool, black bearskin, white gloves, eyes on the carved leaf high on the far pillar, the rifle held just so, saying nothing, turning my head for no one. People still climbed the steps beside me to grin into their cameras, and most of them were kind, and a few were foolish, and now and then one was cruel, and to all of them I gave the same thing, which was the stillness. Because here is the truth the man with the horn spent an afternoon failing to understand, the truth my old color sergeant gave me in my first week on that stone, the truth I would give to you now if you stood where I stood. The stillness is not the absence of a man. It is the whole of him held. Any fool can swing a fist. The whole world can swing a fist. The rarer thing, the harder thing, the thing the wool and the bearskin and the white gloves are all quietly saying, is to be a man entirely able to, and choose, second by second, all the long afternoon and all the long years, not to. He brought a horn to break me. He left having taught a watching world the one lesson he could never learn himself. And the gate I stood is still standing, and still guarded, and the leaf high on the far pillar is exactly where it has always been, which, on a post like mine, is the only kind of victory there is, and the only kind worth keeping.